Jon Blau from the Post and Courier has decided to celebrate this week by taking his laptop up to Mecklenburg County, and it's been hard news, unfortunately, for Jon. What a week for that, Jon. It's a strange time, right? It's 108 degrees outside almost everywhere, and yet here you are probably wearing long pants going to a courtroom in Charlotte.
Yeah, I wore jeans. I didn't get too fancy. But, we're listening to arguments about jurisdiction and sovereign immunity and all kinds of interesting stuff. I mean, the ACC's attorneys did make it interesting by playing a clip from the movie Casablanca, which I didn't expect to see in a courtroom, but that was interesting.
You know, Jon, maybe you could help us with this. I won't go through everything, but I do think there seems to be an argument for the ACC, and part of it plays around that the Casablanca clip which they played, which involves a local French police captain who says, "Oh, I can't believe there's gambling here," and then they hand him his winnings, almost as if it's all happening in front of you. You know, one thing, let me lay out the ACC's case, essentially, and then you tell me where it is that Clemson is trying to poke holes in it. The ACC is suggesting, hey, this grant of rights deal, you, meaning Clemson, Jim Clements, you were a part of it. You were part of the driving force in the negotiations with ESPN. And the fact that we wanted to do this deal was not only because we were trying to get you money for the foreseeable future, it was also because we were trying to keep the ACC intact, which is something you were fully on board with at the time. And you were one of the schools championing, let's get it a long-term deal. This way nobody goes anywhere. And then you want to change the rules midway through just because the SEC and Big Ten have lapped you and got such better deals. So it sounds like the ACC, they're not servicing Clemson by saying these things, but it does seem like, at least legally, they have a case.
Yeah, but again, going back to that Casablanca clip, it was actually in reference to the fact that, the winnings, quote unquote, that, are handed to Captain Renault, are similar, they say, to the winnings that Clemson took from when Maryland was sued by the ACC. I mean, they got an exit penalty distribution. And so obviously they knew that they could be sued for trying to do the same thing. And they're almost, what the ACC's attorneys are saying is almost like they're pleading ignorance that this might happen or should happen. And then, going back to President Clements, I mean, the ACC's attorneys also did that. They flashed a giant picture of Jim Clements on stage with John Swofford, the ACC commissioner, and a representative from ESPN, showing the fact that, these were not passive people. I mean, Jim Clements was literally the head of the board that, agreed to this thing. And so, the ACC certainly seems to have a really strong case. Obviously, Clemson's trying to get an interpretation of the grant of rights, which, again, people can be kind of cynical about or kind of question why they're doing it now, obviously. But that it doesn't specifically, if you look at the contract language of the ESPN deal, the grant of rights, say that into the future necessarily means if we go to another conference that we can't have our rights back, which, most people are going to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. But, they're trying to say that the language itself doesn't preclude that in terms of, yes, you own the rights of the games that we played in the ACC. You can run replays all you want on the ACC network, but you don't own our rights when we leave and we're no longer a member of this conference. So, if you wanted to take a side, I think the ACC's side, if you wanted to be a lawyer for a day, I think it would be easier to argue their case. But obviously, again, there's just so much money at stake. Clemson really wants this to happen, so they're going to get some lawyers that can kind of create another argument, a novel argument that maybe creates a little bit of a loophole that can kind of distress the ACC a little bit and maybe negotiate an exit penalty that's a little bit smaller than $140 million.
Jon, you've obviously been reporting on Clemson the last few years, and now this is like a divorce, and the marriage has been rocky for a while. So you knew all of this was bubbling below the surface. You're probably like me. You're hearing things, and then it starts to get real, and now you're reporting on things that are legitimate. I mean, it's out in the open. And to me, like a divorce, one thing about it is where this is headed, if one of the parties doesn't want to be in the marriage anymore, I don't think there's any way that it's going to work out, right? I mean, at this point, I don't see any half measures or compromises. Even if the ACC wins a string of cases, really what that's going to mean for, say, Florida State and Clemson, I believe, is the price tag just gets higher. There's just more pain that they'll have to endure to buy their way out of this. But at this point, do you see any way Clemson's in the ACC, say, 4 years from now or 5 years from now?
Yeah, not unless there's some miracle where, the ACC is able to get Notre Dame or something like that to actually become a full member, and all of a sudden their, distributions just rise, by 100%, they double or something. I don't think it's happening, because that's the whole issue. Obviously people can think it's a little shallow, but they don't want the Clemsons of the world that want to compete at the highest level of college football, don't want their rival South Carolina getting an $80 million distribution when they're getting about 50, just because there's such a gap there in terms of what you can pay your coaches, the sports you can run, and obviously this revenue distribution issue coming with the House settlement. You need to have the money. And so, I don't think that circumstance is going to change. And so at the end of the day, if that's not changing, Clemson has to try to find a way to get to one of these two power conferences, either the SEC or the Big Ten, which is going to pay them that amount that allows them to stay competitive with others. So, I don't think it's changing. I mean, Graham Neff forever in public has been saying, when he's asked about the ACC and what he's doing for Clemson, said, we're looking out for Clemson. We're not, at the end of the day, we're going to do what's best for us. And this is just an extension of that, obviously a much more public and much more messy extension of that. But, we knew this was coming for a while, and now we're kind of in the beginning of the end, I guess I would say, in terms of playing out Clemson eventually leaving this conference.
You can follow Jon Blau's reporting on Twitter at Jon_Blau, and then you can link to all of the stories from there at the Post and Courier. John, I want you to be able to clarify this too, because I said this yesterday, and I don't know, maybe I didn't realize people were going to be confused about it, but essentially Clemson released the email from the ACC office that was directed toward Graham Neff about trying to move the game between South Carolina and Clemson to Black Friday. So maybe you can go into that a little bit. That was the bombshell from yesterday. I didn't think it was going to be confusing because I thought it made ESPN look awful. I thought it made the ACC look awful, but you know how social media runs with things. So maybe you could take this opportunity and clarify why Clemson released that email and what your thoughts were as you kind of picked through it.
Yeah, I think some people thought reading the email, well, this looks like it was phrased in a certain way that the ACC was trying to lay out how bad Clemson was being, and they wanted that out there. But no, what it really is that Clemson filed a memorandum in opposition to the ACC's motion to dismiss the case in Pickens County. And basically what the Clemson was arguing in this memorandum is that a South Carolina court should have jurisdiction because ACC does significant business in this state, and part of what they included was an affidavit, a sworn affidavit from athletic director Graham Neff talking about all the facilities that the ACC gets to use, not only for obviously the home football games of Clemson that they broadcast, but all the championship events that Clemson has hosted, all of the content that ESPN's allowed to use Clemson's facilities to produce, and then also the ways in which the ACC and ESPN can dictate to Clemson, this is where you're going to play, and this is what time you're going to play, what day. And even when the schedule's set, we're going to come back and say, oh, never mind, we want to move you to a different day. And so they attached that email as kind of a piece of evidence to back up Graham Neff's sworn affidavit to show that, this is the level of control that ESPN and the ACC exerts on Clemson, which is a university in the state of South Carolina. And yes, this court in South Carolina should have jurisdiction because they're obviously doing a whole lot to affect kind of what we do and when we do it. So, I think, again, a lot of people thought that maybe the ACC wanted to use this to kind of slander Clemson for refusing to do all this. But at the end of the day, that Dabo Swinney's made the point himself. He doesn't like playing Saturday games. I mean, he had his kids playing high school football. He wanted to go watch them play high school football on Fridays. He's one of those big proponents of that. And so, yeah, Graham Ness at the end of the day said, no thanks. Yeah, we're not doing that. And obviously, again, it fit into a piece of kind of what Clemson's trying to do right now in terms of arguing over jurisdiction and trying to keep the case in South Carolina.
Yeah, and I was surprised, actually, the ACC worded it that strongly because, to me, what I said yesterday after reading that was, boy, what's the ACC doing? Their commodities are Clemson football, Florida State football, North Carolina basketball, and Duke basketball. And that's actually gets me into the next question I wanted to ask. What are you hearing? If Clemson and Florida State kind of have they have the ability to flex and muscle their way out of the ACC. If that were to take place, what other dominoes then do you believe would fall? Because I don't know what's being reported, say, in North Carolina and Virginia, but I cannot imagine the ACC could stay together as it's currently constructed with those Tobacco Road schools, knowing that they won't have Clemson and Florida State bringing in that football money. Do you know anything, or are you hearing more innuendo around what might happen if this comes to pass in the next 6 months to a year?
Yeah, it's all speculation at this point. I mean, I haven't heard definitively. There's an invite from here, an invite from there. I mean, obviously did hear, maybe bringing in SMU, Cal, Stanford. That was in part because, the ACC is bracing for the possibility they could lose some schools. And obviously there are 18 teams deep right now, but it could go back again to 16, 15 if you start losing some of these schools. Obviously we've heard the rumors about, geographically, Florida State and Clemson fit the SEC, but does South Carolina want Clemson in the SEC? Would South Carolina even have a voice in that? At the end of the day, in terms of the way this thing's going, just in a broader sense, geography and breaking new ground is part of this. Obviously, the Big Ten went from the Midwest to the East Coast to the West Coast. They don't really have that southeastern quadrant yet. Does the Big Ten want a school like Clemson maybe and Florida State maybe a little bit more than the SEC even would because it breaks new ground? Would the SEC want a Virginia and a North Carolina because that breaks new ground? There's again, it's all speculation at this point. We don't have any hard evidence of any of this, but there are going to be many dominoes once this whole thing kind of does start to fall. Obviously, Clemson and Florida State bring their lawsuits, kind of tries to put that in motion and knock some of those dominoes over. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting situation to see kind of what actually does unfold. I mean, the Big Ten, again, I brought up that scenario, but Clemson doesn't have AAU status. That's important to that conference. There's a whole lot of things that have to happen. There's more questions than answers at this point in terms of what will happen.
All right. Again, at Jon_Blau, BLAU, reporting for Post and Courier. And trust me, this fall, John and I'll both be covering football again. Okay, that'll be fun. We'll see each other at the field, and he won't have to do this anymore for a while. And that's the final question for you, John. What is the timeline now? Because I know you've been tweeting about that as well, that the judges are trying their best to work inside a timeline. When do you think we get some kind of resolution, some kind of answer? In other words, if you're a Clemson football fan out there, they're like, look, I kind of want to know what conference we're going to be in 2 years. When do you think any of that will start to crystallize?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still hard to know. I mean, we do know in terms of the jurisdiction arguments, which is kind of the opening phase of this, that Judge Bledsoe in Charlotte, he's going to try to offer a written opinion on what he believes should happen with the Charlotte case. That's going to happen midweek next week. Judge Gravely in Pickens County, with Clemson's case there, he's going to hear some arguments on the 12th of next week. And so there'll be kind of more arguments there, but he won't necessarily rule from the bench. He'll probably then take his time and offer an opinion on whether that case should continue. If you want to look to the Florida State example, both the Florida and North Carolina cases in that one continue are both going on, and that's probably going to be the case with Clemson. I don't think that either of the courts are going to throw it out. And so that takes you through July, and then there's going to be appeals, and that's August, September. I mean, this is probably going to go all the way through football season, unless, again, at the end of the day, the ACC or Clemson experiences enough defeat or just feeling like not very good about their case, that they feel like this is just better to settle, then maybe you could have some movement. But I don't know if that's coming, in August of this year, or if it's going to be August of next year, or how long. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think this is going to take more than a year or two at the longest. But, it's definitely not to be resolved within the next month or so. I'd be very surprised if it was.
Well, not what I wanted to hear, John. So that's it. We'll try to. Boy, what sour news delivered the day before 4th of July. And we'll end on a high note then. All right, I saw in your bio you grew up on Rocky films. Me too. When I'm not feeling it, my go-to Rocky montage is Rocky IV, in the snow, in Siberia. I can't help but go, if I don't feel like going to the gym, that gets me there. What's your go-to Rocky moment?
Adrian, just do one thing for me. Come here, whisper, win. It's just like the goosebumps every single time. Man. Love it.
Oh, that's Rocky II. That's Rocky II.
That's Rocky II?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
No,
all right.
They're all great for their different reasons, I would say.
Yeah, except for the fifth one, which never happened. All right, that's it.
No, it never happened.
Never happened. Not real. All right, thank you so much, John. Try to relax a little bit, and we'll see you on Twitter, and then we'll see you at the stadium this fall covering football.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
There's Jon Blau. We got to get